My sister Savannah was currently melting inside a pitch-black, suffocating canvas tent in the sweltering Nashville heat, watching her new father-in-law scream inches from our dad's face. The venue's rented generator had just failed, plunging her 300-guest reception into humid darkness. 4,000 miles away, I sat bathed in a cool Mediterranean breeze, sipping vintage champagne under a 17th century olive tree, watching her engineered disaster unfold on a live stream. Before we get into how my family's vanity ultimately handed me the deed to their prized lake house, drop a comment with your age and let me know where you are listening to Amanda Told Stories from right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. To understand the trap they walked into, we have to rewind the tape to a crisp autumn morning 1 year prior. The air in eastern Tennessee carried the scent of wet pine and wood smoke. Ethan proposed to me at dawn, right on the misty edge of a smoky mountain trail overlooking the valley. He did not hire a hidden photographer or arrange a public spectacle. He simply knelt in the damp grass and presented a vintage emerald-cut diamond. It was understated, enduring, and meticulously chosen. It was a reflection of the quiet life we were building together. 10 minutes later, we drove back to my parents' sprawling, timber-framed lodge to share the news. We barely made it past the foyer. Before Ethan could even clear his throat to make our announcement, my younger sister Savannah struck a silver spoon against her crystal water goblet. The sharp clink paralyzed the room. She grabbed the hand of Preston Montgomery, a notorious Nashville commercial real estate heir, and hoisted their intertwined fingers into the air like a trophy. "We are getting married," Savannah shrieked, the sound piercing the quiet hum of the vaulted living room. She thrust her left hand forward, parading a trendy 4-carat halo ring. Even from several feet away, the center stone looked noticeably milky under the recessed kitchen lighting. It was ostentatious, fragile, and rapidly depreciating. It was a fitting mirror of their relationship. My mother Vivian gasped in delight, abandoning the charcuterie board to retrieve a chilled bottle of champagne. She popped the cork just for Savannah, pouring overflowing flutes to toast the impending union with the wealthy Montgomery dynasty. I sat at the far edge of the leather sofa. I slid my left hand beneath a linen napkin, burying my own milestone in the dark. "We are thinking May," Savannah announced, swirling her glass. "A spring gala in the city. The Montgomerys expect a serious production." May. The exact month I had already claimed in our family group chat 3 weeks prior. Ethan's jaw tightened visibly. He reached under the heavy mahogany table, his fingers finding mine, a silent question passing between us. I squeezed his hand once, keeping my expression neutral. "Your sister's wedding is the family's priority," my mother said, looking pointedly at me as she handed Savannah another drink. "We cannot be expected to manage 2 events. You will just have to push yours to next year, Chelsea. You are always so flexible." I looked at the woman who had spent my entire life pushing me into the background to make room for her golden child. I felt the cold metal of my ring pressing into my skin under the fabric. "That is fine," I said, my voice analytical and flat. "Enjoy the toast." They mistook my compliance for submission. I did not raise my voice or demand my rightful turn in the spotlight. In my world, anger is a useless emotion unless you attach a lethal strategy to it. They assumed I was just a mid-level logistics manager who would quietly step aside. They had no idea I had recently sold my data infrastructure startup for 8 figures. I was not just keeping my date. I was upgrading the battlefield. 2 weeks after the engagement ambush in my parents' foyer, the inevitable collision occurred. I was sitting at the quartz island of my downtown Nashville penthouse. The morning sun glared off the surface of the Cumberland River below. My phone vibrated against the cool stone countertop. It was a group message from Savannah. The attachment was a digital save-the-date card, dripping in faux gold foil and swirling cursive fonts. Savannah and Preston request the honor of your presence, May 14th, the Grand Bell Country Club. I stared at the glowing screen. May 14th. The exact Saturday I had claimed for my own wedding. I felt the familiar weight of being written over. It was a sensation I had known since childhood. I did not reply. I set the device face down, picked up my black coffee, and watched the morning traffic crawl over the bridge. My pulse remained steady. That afternoon, I drove out to my parents' property. The timber lodge felt different now. It had been transformed into a frantic war room for Savannah's social climbing. I found my mother Vivian in the sunroom. The space smelled heavily of her signature, overpowering floral perfume, mixed with stale coffee. She was surrounded by ivory fabric swatches and glossy bridal magazines. She did not look up when I crossed the threshold. She was too busy running a manicured fingernail down a list of potential floral arrangements. "You let her book May 14th, I said. My voice was level, but the quiet acoustics of the sunroom carried the weight of the accusation. Vivian sighed the way a weary teacher sighs at a slow student. She finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes held zero apologies. "Chelsea. She is marrying into the Montgomery family. Preston has hundreds of out-of-town guests arriving. We had to secure the only spring date the Grand Bell had available." "I had my date set first," I replied. Vivian waved her hand in the air, dismissing the fact as if it were a minor scheduling typo. "Your guest list is small. You and Ethan can get married at a local park or a nice restaurant any weekend you choose. You are flexible. Savannah needs the spotlight right now. This is a crucial social maneuver for your father and me." The dramatic irony in the room was thick enough to choke on. My mother was patronizing me, assuming my budget was limited to barbecue catering and a rented public gazebo. I looked at the fabric swatches scattered across her table. They looked cheap and rushed. "I am not moving my date," I said. Vivian's jaw tightened. The polished facade of Southern charm dropped instantly. "Well then, you are going to have a very empty room." The formal ultimatum arrived via text later that evening. I was sitting on my balcony with Ethan. We were reviewing architectural mock-ups for our venue. My screen lit up with a long message from my mother. "Your sister's wedding is the priority right now. The Montgomery family expects our full presence, and we must host them properly. We cannot come to yours if you refuse to move it. Please be reasonable and change your weekend." Ethan read the message over my shoulder. He let out a slow breath, the night air cooling against our skin. "What do you want to do?" he asked softly. I did not hesitate. I typed my response with steady, deliberate fingers. "That is fine. Enjoy the dinner." I hit send. They mistook my compliance for submission. My mother likely smiled at her screen, believing she had successfully bullied her practical, boring daughter into yielding once again. She thought my brief response meant I was retreating to lick my wounds in private. She did not understand that I was simply clearing the board to play a much larger game. My family operated under a profound delusion regarding my life. To them, I was just a mid-level logistics manager. They thought I spent my days fixing supply chain spreadsheets for a regional trucking firm. They viewed my career as a cute computer hobby, something stable but unremarkable. When I bought a new car, they assumed I took out a terrible loan. When I missed family dinners, they assumed I was working overtime just to make my rent payments. They did not know that 18 months ago, I had sold my data infrastructure startup to a global tech conglomerate. The payout was in the high 8 figures. Because the acquisition was bound by a strict non-disclosure agreement and funneled through an anonymous holding company, my loud, status-obsessed family remained entirely in the dark. I kept my wealth hidden on purpose. I learned early in life that my parents viewed money not as security, but as a weapon. I remembered asking for a small loan to cover my college textbooks, only to be denied because Savannah needed a custom pageant dress. If they knew I possessed serious capital, they would have demanded I fund Savannah's endless stream of failed business ventures. They would have paraded me around their country club friends like a prized show pony, claiming my success as their own parenting victory. I preferred the quiet erasure. I preferred being the forgotten sister. It gave me the freedom to build my empire without their toxic interference. While my mother spent her afternoons at the club bragging to anyone who would listen about Savannah marrying old money, I was quietly executing my own plans. Savannah was busy haggling with local Nashville vendors, trying to stretch my father's dwindling bank account to fit her grand delusions. She was frantic, demanding, and stressed. I operated in pure silence. I did not need to haggle over table linens or chair rentals. I opened my secure banking portal and initiated a wire transfer. I secured a Michelin-starred culinary team from Chicago. They would be flying in exclusively to cater my wedding, preparing a menu of Wagyu beef and truffle infusions. I hired a floral designer who typically serviced European royalty, paying the heavy retainer in full. Every vendor I booked was required to sign a strict confidentiality clause. My family thought my lack of complaints meant I was throwing a pathetic elopement out of spite. They thought my budget was a fraction of Savannah's floral bill. Every lie Savannah spun to our extended family about my supposed poverty only added fuel to the trap I was building. I wanted them complacent. I wanted them to feel superior. The quiet erasure I had endured my whole life was no longer a source of pain. It was a lethal weapon. I was letting them dig a financial grave, blinded by their own hubris. Because while Vivian and Darren were busy trying to impress the Montgomery dynasty, a very different reality was brewing across town. Preston Montgomery's family was not the financial fortress my parents believed them to be. The old money they boasted about was tied up in failing commercial real estate. And my father was about to discover exactly how much keeping up appearances was going to cost his own bank account. While my father was busy draining his retirement accounts to impress the Montgomery dynasty in Tennessee, I was settling into a first-class leather seat on a transatlantic flight to Marseille. The flight attendant handed me a warm towel and a glass of sparkling water. I closed my eyes and let the low, steady hum of the jet engines drown out the memory of my mother's frantic wedding planning. My parents were fighting a brutal ground war in Nashville. They were haggling over ice sculptures, screaming at local caterers, and losing sleep over satin chair sashes. I was operating in an entirely different atmosphere. For the past 2 years, I had harbored a monumental secret across the Atlantic Ocean. When the sale of my tech company finalized, I did not buy a sprawling mansion in the local southern suburbs. I wanted a sanctuary, far away from the aggressive posturing and neon lights of my hometown. I wanted stone walls that could not hear the constant demands of high society. So I bought the Château de la Roche. It was a $14 million 17th century fortress nestled deep in the fragrant lavender fields of Provence. I paid in full with a single wire transfer through my holding company. Driving up the cypress-lined avenue from the airport, the heavy iron gates parted silently. The estate rose against the bright blue Mediterranean sky. It was built of pale limestone that held centuries of quiet history. The air smelled intensely of wild thyme and dry summer earth. I spent my first afternoon walking the cool, echoing corridors. My footsteps tapped lightly against the ancient terracotta tiles. This place was the exact opposite of Savannah's chaotic life. It was solid, enduring, and totally immune to the fickle opinions of the country club elite. I spent my early 20s huddled in cramped server rooms, writing the algorithms that would eventually secure my financial freedom. While Savannah was competing in regional beauty pageants, funded by my father's desperate credit lines, I was building encrypted data pipelines. My family saw my late nights glowing behind a computer monitor as a pathetic social failure. They never bothered to ask what the code actually did. If they had asked, They might have realized I was constructing a digital architecture that corporate buyers would eventually value at $85 million. Their ignorance was my greatest shield. In the chateau library, bathed in golden afternoon light, I finalized my guest list. I did not invite the sprawling network of superficial acquaintances my parents coveted. My list was ruthlessly curated. I invited the brilliant software engineers who helped me build my company. I invited Ethan's grounded and loving family. I also invited the very few relatives on my side who had actually shown up for my college graduation. These were the people who never treated me like a broken background prop. Aunt Martha, who mailed me books on coding when I was a teenager. Uncle Henry, who always asked about my intellectual goals instead of my waistline. My quiet solitude was interrupted by the harsh vibration of my phone on the wooden desk. A voicemail from Vivian had landed in my inbox. I tapped the screen and put the device on speaker, letting her sharp voice bounce off the historic stone walls. "Chelsea, sweetie," Vivian began, her tone dripping with manufactured pity. Savannah really needed to secure the premier floral designer in the city. The Montgomerys expect a highly elevated aesthetic. I know you were hoping to use that specific florist, but you just have to understand our position. Just go down to the local grocery market and pick up some nice seasonal blooms. It fits your modest budget perfectly, and a small park wedding does not need anything fancy anyway. I stood in the central courtyard of the chateau and smiled. The sheer density of the dramatic irony was magnificent. I was not alone in the courtyard. I was standing directly next to Julian. Julian was not just a florist. He was the chief botanist for a royal palace in Monaco. He was currently sketching a breathtaking installation of white orchids and rare blue hydrangeas designed to cascade down the grand staircase of my estate. We were discussing importing the flowers directly from the Azores and suspending them above the dining terrace using invisible tensile wire. The cost of my floral installation alone exceeded my parents' entire annual household income. Julian looked up from his leather sketchbook, confused by the shrill American voice emanating from the phone. I shook my head, signaling for him to ignore the noise. My mother thought she had cornered the market on luxury by stealing a local vendor in Tennessee. She had no concept of the global stage I was playing on. The voicemail was just the beginning of their psychological campaign. Over the next few days, text messages from confused cousins began rolling in. Savannah had launched a preemptive strike on my reputation. She was actively telling our extended family that I was throwing a cheap, rushed elopement out of pure jealousy. According to her carefully crafted narrative, I was so bitter about being overshadowed by her grand society gala that I was fleeing the country. She told everyone I was getting married in a pathetic, budget-friendly ceremony just to spite her. I received a text message from Aunt Martha. She wrote that Savannah told the family I was getting married in a municipal courthouse somewhere in Europe and buying a synthetic dress off a discount rack. Martha kindly offered to lend me a few $100s so I could at least afford a decent local photographer. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, but I pushed it down. I thanked Martha for her immense kindness, declined the money, and promised her the photos would turn out fine. A reactive sister would have posted a picture of the $14 million estate right then and there. A lesser person would have proven her wrong instantly to save face. But I possessed the discipline of a chief executive officer who knew exactly how to let a loud competitor destroy themselves. I let Savannah weave her pathetic narrative. I did not correct a single cousin. I did not defend my choices to my aunts. I let the lies spread like a virus through the family tree. Every lie Savannah told about my supposed poverty was just adding dense layers of gunpowder to the trap I was constructing. Every smug comment my mother made at her country club luncheons was digging their social grave a few inches deeper. I wanted them utterly complacent. I wanted them to stand at the very top of their artificial pedestal so the inevitable fall would shatter their illusions forever. While they were busy trying to humiliate me, they were ignoring a catastrophic structural flaw in their own foundation. The Montgomery family was an illusion. They projected immense wealth, but their commercial real estate empire was heavily leveraged and actively crumbling under the weight of terrible investments. Preston was not marrying Savannah for love. He was marrying her because he mistakenly believed my father was sitting on a mountain of liquid cash. The irony was beautiful and mathematical. The Montgomerys were faking their wealth to secure my father's assets. My father was draining his assets to impress the Montgomerys. It was a snake eating its own tail in a closed loop of financial delusion. And the entire time, the only person holding actual liquid capital was the daughter they had completely discarded. The pressure cooker back in Nashville was about to burst. My father's desperate need to maintain the facade was about to force him into a devastating corner, paving the way for a desperate decision that would hand me the keys to his absolute ruin. A hidden financial cancer was actively devouring the Montgomery family empire right beneath the polished surface of Nashville society. Preston Montgomery carried the posture of a billionaire heir. He drove a leased European sports car, wore bespoke Italian suits, and possessed the effortless arrogance of a man who believed his bloodline was royalty. The local society pages certainly treated his family like aristocrats. But old money often hides new debt. Preston's father managed a commercial real estate portfolio that was secretly drowning in variable interest rates. Their flagship strip malls were sitting vacant. Their downtown office buildings were hemorrhaging corporate tenants. The Montgomerys were cash poor and leveraged to the hilt. Preston was not marrying my sister out of profound, unwavering devotion. He was executing a calculated financial merger. He looked at my father Darren and saw a wealthy timber baron. Preston lusted after the prized Smoky Mountain lake house our family owned, assuming Savannah would inherit the pristine waterfront acreage. He firmly believed marrying into our family would inject much-needed liquidity into his own sinking trust fund. The majestic irony was that my father was executing the exact same grift in reverse. Darren was bleeding dry. The family timber business had seen consecutive years of dismal yields due to changing environmental regulations and poor management. The property taxes on the sprawling residential estate and the coveted lake house were suffocating him. He was quietly liquidating his retirement portfolios just to keep the electricity turned on and the landscaping pristine. Yet he was terrified of looking inadequate in front of his new in-laws. Darren desperately needed the Montgomery connection to secure new business loans and maintain his fragile social standing in the community. So when Savannah demanded a towering 6-tier fondant cake adorned with edible gold leaf, Darren swallowed his rising panic and handed over his credit card. When she insisted on erecting enormous, climate-controlled canvas tents on the country club lawn because the grand ballroom simply was not large enough for the Montgomery guest list, Darren drained his secondary savings account. His wife, Vivian, was equally complicit. Preston's mother frequently made passive-aggressive comments about the necessity of high-end hospitality, driving Vivian to order custom imported silk favors for the guests. Darren was financing an illusion, hoping the eventual marriage would somehow magically rescue him from bankruptcy. While my father was hyperventilating over red spreadsheets in his home office, Savannah turned her attention back to her favorite sport, sabotaging me. Even with her grand gala expanding by the hour, she remained obsessively focused on ruining my supposed budget wedding. She began monitoring my social media footprints and interrogating our cousins, trying to uncover which local vendors I was hiring. I decided to toss her a piece of raw meat. In the world of corporate cybersecurity, this is called deploying a honeypot. It is a decoy system designed to lure in a hostile attacker, keeping them occupied and distracted while the real network remains totally hidden. I called Aunt Martha one afternoon. I made sure my voice sounded strained and defeated. I casually mentioned that I was heartbroken because I could not afford the deposit for a specific bluegrass and jazz ensemble based out of East Nashville. I knew Martha meant well, but she was a notorious gossip who would instantly relay the information to my mother. The bait worked flawlessly. Less than 24 hours later, my phone lit up with a smug text message from Savannah. She attached a screenshot of a signed contract with that exact local band. "I am so sorry," Chelsea Savannah wrote, her digital tone dripping with fake sympathy. "Preston just loved their sound, and we really needed a secondary band for the cocktail hour. I hope you can find a nice playlist for your little park gathering." I sat on the velvet sofa in my chateau library, listening to the gentle rustle of the French wind through the open windows. I crafted a response, playing the role of the devastated sibling. I typed out a message expressing my deep disappointment, letting her bask in the petty victory. She thought she had stolen my musical entertainment and ruined my day. She had no idea that I had just tricked her into spending another $10,000 of our father's rapidly vanishing cash on a band she did not even want. Meanwhile, I picked up my phone and dialed a private number in Paris. I finalized my actual musical arrangement. I secured a renowned classical string quartet that frequently performed at the Louvre. They would be taking a private train down to Provence to play custom arrangements during my evening reception under the stars. I was playing a strategic game of chess on a global board, while Savannah was proudly capturing pawns in a kiddie pool. But my tactical misdirection was accelerating a much larger crisis back home. Savannah's unchecked spending, coupled with Vivian's competitive purchases, was pushing Darren past the brink of ruin. The breaking point arrived on a humid Tuesday morning. The Montgomery family patriarch called Darren with a casual, devastating suggestion. He insisted that the rehearsal dinner be upgraded to a highly exclusive downtown steakhouse, a venue known for catering to celebrities and politicians. He suggested they split the $60,000 bill to show a unified family front. Darren agreed instantly, his foolish pride overriding his basic arithmetic. He hung up the phone, his hands trembling slightly as he opened his banking application on his desktop computer. The numbers staring back at him were a death sentence. His primary checking account was nearly empty. Every single credit card was at its limit. He had already tapped all the available equity on the primary timber lodge. The only asset remaining untouched was the Smoky Mountain Lake House, but he could not secure a traditional bank loan fast enough to cover the looming vendor deadlines and the new rehearsal dinner deposit. The physical toll of the financial ruin was hitting him hard. He sat in his leather office chair, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. If a single check bounced, the Montgomerys would instantly realize they were marrying into a broke family. The illusion would shatter. The vendors would walk out. Preston would likely call off the engagement to protect his own family's fragile reputation. Darren was trapped in a financial vice of his own making. He needed a significant injection of untraceable cash, and he needed it within 48 hours. In his desperate mind, Darren calculated his remaining options. He remembered the daughter he had pushed aside. He thought about the quiet logistics manager who drove an 8-year-old sedan and supposedly lived a frugal, boring life in a modest apartment. My parents had spent decades assuming I hoarded my modest corporate salary because I had no social life and no expensive taste. They firmly believed I was sitting on a comfortable, easily accessible nest egg. Darren did not view me as a daughter with a future to protect. He viewed me as a rainy day fund. He convinced himself that my savings were rightfully his to command. After all, he had raised me. He felt inherently entitled to my financial stability. He decided he would simply demand a temporary loan from my accounts, promising to pay it back after the wedding, when the Montgomery connection supposedly generated new business wealth for the timber company. He did not realize he was about to step directly into a legal trap designed by a corporate executive. He thought he was going to manipulate a naive tech worker into handing over her humble savings to save the family name. He was about to make an arrogant, reckless decision that would legally seal his ruin and officially hand me the title to his most prized possession. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in the glass-enclosed corner office of my downtown Nashville headquarters, reviewing international freight contracts. The caller identification on my screen displayed my father's name. Darren had not called me directly in over a month. He usually preferred to relay his demands through my mother. I let it ring 3 times, setting my pen down on the mahogany desk before accepting the call. "Chelsea, sweetheart," Darren began. His voice was thick with a synthetic warmth I had not heard since I won a middle school academic decathlon. I did not return the fake affection. I simply asked him what he needed. The directness unsettled him for a fraction of a second, but his desperation quickly paved over the awkwardness. He cleared his throat and launched into a rehearsed speech about cash flow issues and temporary liquidity problems. He spoke in circles for 5 minutes before finally arriving at the actual demand. He needed a bridge loan. He needed $500,000 in cash to cover Savannah's final deposits and the extravagant rehearsal dinner the Montgomerys had forced upon him. He pitched it as a short-term favor. He promised to repay every cent by the end of the summer, claiming a massive timber contract was currently tied up in regulatory red tape. He assumed my years of driving an older sedan and living quietly meant I was hoarding my modest logistics salary. He thought I was a naive, frugal spinster sitting on a pile of unspent paychecks. When he asked for $500,000, he was throwing a desperate dart into the dark. He figured I might have a fraction of that amount, and any fraction would help him survive the immediate vendor deadlines. I let a long stretch of silence hang on the line. I wanted him to feel the crushing weight of his request. I wanted his heart rate to spike as he waited for my rejection. "I can wire the funds by Thursday," I said. The sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line was audible. Darren was stunned. He had expected to beg, to negotiate, to use heavy family guilt to pry a few $1,000s from my hands. Discovering that his discarded daughter actually possessed $500,000 in liquid cash short-circuited his brain. He quickly regained his composure, his voice returning to that sickeningly sweet register. "You are saving this family, Chelsea," he said. "I knew you had a good head for saving money. We will draw up a simple IOU, and I will pay you back with interest." "I am not doing a simple IOU," I replied smoothly. "We are going to execute a formal promissory note. I will have my lawyers draft the documents. You will put up the Smoky Mountain Lake house as collateral." Darren laughed a tight, nervous sound. He thought I was playing pretend corporate executive. He thought I was just imitating the business jargon I heard at my logistics job. He agreed instantly, assuming any contract I produced would be amateurish and unenforceable. He loved that lake house more than he loved his own family. It was his sanctuary, his status symbol among the local hunting and fishing elite. He agreed to leverage it because he never intended to lose it, and he firmly believed he could easily manipulate me if the repayment date came and went. He had no idea he was stepping into a lethal financial trap designed by an 8-figure tech founder. I ended the call and immediately contacted my private wealth management team and my corporate attorneys. I instructed them to draft a commercial-grade promissory note. I dictated the exact terms. The interest rate was standard, and the repayment date was set for the end of August. But hidden within the dense legal jargon on page 4 was a specific and deadly mechanism. I instructed my lawyers to embed a strict cross-default clause. A cross-default clause is a beautiful piece of financial engineering. It is a provision often used in complex corporate lending. It stipulates that if the borrower defaults on any other related financial obligation, the primary loan instantly accelerates and goes into default as well. I had the lawyers explicitly define related financial obligations to include any contracts, invoices, or payments associated with Savannah's wedding. The math was brutal and airtight. If Darren bounced a single check to the country club, if his credit card declined at the florist, or if he failed to pay the tent rental company on time, he would be in immediate default on my $500,000 loan. The penalty for default was the immediate forfeiture of the collateral. The second a vendor check bounced in Nashville, I would legally own the Smoky Mountain Lake House. My lawyers emailed the encrypted digital document to Darren on Wednesday morning. He was sitting in his home office, drowning in past due notices and frantic emails from Savannah's wedding planner. His primary focus was securing the cash to keep his social facade from crumbling. He opened the document on his computer. A prudent man would have forwarded a 50-page commercial loan agreement to a real estate attorney for review. A humble man would have read the fine print before risking his most prized asset. Darren was neither prudent nor humble. Blinded by hubris and the burning urgency to impress Preston Montgomery's father, he skipped directly to the final page. He clicked the digital signature box, typed his name, and hit submit. He thought he was outsmarting his boring tech nerd daughter. He believed he had secured free money without any real consequences. He did not read the cross-default clause. He did not understand the legal trigger he had just authorized. He legally handed me the keys to his favorite asset with a single click of his mouse. As soon as the signed document hit my secure server, I authorized the wire transfer. $500,000 flowed from my holding company directly into Darren's depleted checking account. The celebration in their household was instantaneous. Savannah did not know where the money came from, only that her father had magically produced the funds to keep her dream alive. She immediately went on a spending spree. She upgraded her floral packages, ordered custom-imported silk linens for the reception tables, and booked a secondary string quartet for the rehearsal dinner. They were happily spending my money to fund the very spectacle they had used to push me out of the family. They were dancing on the edge of a cliff, completely unaware that I controlled the gravity. With the financial trap fully set and locked in place, I turned my attention to the final phase of my strategy. I sat at the quartz island in my penthouse, running my fingers over a stack of thick, cream-colored cotton envelopes. Inside were the invitations to my own wedding. The design was minimalist and elegant, utilizing letterpress typography on heavy archival paper. The text was simple and direct. Ethan and Chelsea request the honor of your presence for a weekend celebration in Provence, France. I deliberately omitted any mention of the chateau ownership. The invitation read like a destination wedding at a rented venue. It did not sound cheap, but it also did not reveal the staggering wealth behind the event. I wanted my family to assume I was emptying my savings account just to afford a nice European vacation. I applied vintage postage stamps to each envelope, my movements slow and deliberate. I took the stack of pristine envelopes down to the corner mailbox and dropped them into the dark metal slot. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the bottom echoed in the quiet evening air. The trap was primed. The money was wired. The legal snare was hidden in plain sight. In exactly 3 days, those thick, cream-colored envelopes would land in the mailboxes of our mutual relatives across the state. My parents thought they commanded the loyalty of our entire extended family. They were about to discover that respect is earned, not demanded, and a quiet defection was about to tear their carefully curated social circle apart. The Postal Service delivered the heavy cream cotton envelopes on a humid Thursday afternoon. Across the affluent suburbs of Nashville and the sprawling estates of eastern Tennessee, our mutual relatives opened their mailboxes. They did not find a gaudy foil-stamped card demanding their attention. They found a simple, minimalist piece of archival paper. The dark ink pressed into the fibers read clearly, "Chelsea and Ethan request the honor of your presence for a weekend celebration in Provence, France." I purposefully left out any mention of the chateau ownership. The location was listed simply as a private estate in the countryside. The wording suggested a destination wedding, perhaps, at a modest rented villa. I wanted my family to jump to their own conclusions. I knew they would assume I was draining my meager corporate savings just to afford a basic European trip. The defection began within 48 hours. It started with Aunt Martha. She was my father's older sister and a woman who possessed actual generational wealth, unlike my parents, who merely pretended to have it. Martha despised the flashy neon culture Savannah worshipped. She valued substance. When she received my invitation, she immediately logged on to the custom website I had built and submitted her response. She chose my European weekend and politely declined Savannah's sweaty country club gala. Uncle Henry followed shortly after. He was a retired surgeon who had always treated me with quiet respect. Then came my godparents, followed by two prominent cousins who ran successful medical practices. These were the relatives who built their capital through discipline rather than marrying into it. They recognized the toxic vanity radiating from my parents' household. Given the choice between a chaotic, high-society circus in Tennessee and a quiet, elegant evening in the south of France, the decision was effortless. My secure digital portal began filling with confirmed guests. Simultaneously, Savannah's mailbox started filling with polite rejection cards. The realization hit my sister on a Sunday morning. She had been tracking her guest list obsessively, treating her attendance numbers like a competitive sport. When she saw the names of our most respected family members vanishing from her roster, her fabricated composure shattered entirely. She did not call me to discuss the scheduling conflict like a mature adult. She unleashed a barrage of hostile text messages. "You are unbelievable, Chelsea," her first message read. "Sending out fake luxury invites just to steal my thunder? Everyone knows you cannot afford a wedding in France. You are just trying to embarrass me in front of Preston by making our family look divided. Cancel your little picnic and tell Martha to come to my venue." Savannah honestly believed I was bluffing. She thought I was orchestrating a massive lie to siphon attention away from her Montgomery merger. In her mind, I was still the invisible logistics worker, incapable of executing a global event. She assumed the European destination was a pathetic fantasy that would inevitably fall apart before May 14th arrived. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated with an incoming call from Vivian. I answered the call and held the device a few inches away from my ear. I did not need to place her on speakerphone. Her shrill voice easily bridged the distance. "What on earth are you doing to this family?" Vivian screamed. Her southern drawl completely evaporated, replaced by raw indignation. "Martha just called to tell me she booked her calendar for your trip instead of Savannah's reception. Do you have any idea how much commercial flights to Europe cost right now? You are guilting our relatives into bankrupting themselves just to attend your petty revenge party. Savannah is crying in her bedroom because you are ruining her big day." My mother was projecting her own financial panic onto me. She was currently drowning in high-interest debt to fund the Montgomery illusion, so she assumed everyone else was equally stressed about money. She viewed my destination wedding as a malicious financial attack on the extended family. I did not raise my voice to match her frantic energy. I did not defend my timeline or explain my budget. I let her exhaust her lungs for 2 full minutes. When she finally paused to take a breath, I spoke softly. "I am not guilting anyone, Vivian," I said. "They made their own choices. Have a wonderful afternoon." I pressed the red button and ended the call. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, looking out over the winding Cumberland River. The strategy was working perfectly. Their blind arrogance was blinding them to the incoming reality. They were so focused on protecting their fragile social standing that they failed to ask a single practical question about how I was funding this venture. I opened my laptop and navigated to my email client. It was time to permanently neutralize Vivian's argument about expensive commercial flights. I drafted a logistical update to my list of confirmed attendees. "Dear family and friends," the message began. "We are deeply grateful that you are crossing the ocean to celebrate with us. To ensure your travel is as seamless and comfortable as possible, Ethan and I have chartered a private aircraft for our group. The heavy jet will depart directly from Nashville International Airport on the Wednesday before the ceremony. Ground transportation will meet you on the tarmac in Nice to bring you to the estate. All travel expenses are fully covered. Please send your passport details to my coordination team at your earliest convenience. I attached the sleek digital brochure of the luxury aviation company, hit send, and close the computer. I did not need to boast on social media. I knew the communication network of Southern society would do the heavy lifting for me. Within 24 hours, that email leaked. Aunt Martha casually mentioned the private charter during a tennis match at the local club. A cousin forwarded the flight itinerary to a friend. The whisper network of Nashville high society moves faster than a wildfire. The country club ladies who had previously pitied the poor forgotten sister were suddenly captivated. The local narrative shifted violently. The wealthy elite stopped talking about Savannah's massive tent rental and started asking intense questions about Chelsea, who was paying for a transatlantic private jet. How did the quiet logistics manager afford a luxury aviation charter? Did Ethan secretly come from massive wealth? The intense curiosity overshadowed Savannah's carefully curated wedding rollout. Savannah felt the spotlight slipping away from her. The attention she desperately craved was evaporating, replaced by confusing rumors about my supposed hidden fortune. She panicked. Instead of focusing on her own relationship, she became obsessed with destroying my credibility. She needed to reclaim the narrative, and she chose the most toxic route available. She contacted the editor of a prominent local society blog. The website was notorious for publishing thinly veiled gossip about the Nashville elite. Savannah fed them a highly fictionalized sob story, portraying herself as the victim of a jealous, unhinged older sibling. 2 days later, the article went live. The headline was designed for maximum scandal. A tale of two sisters, how a high society dream wedding is being sabotaged by bitter sibling rivalry. The piece did not use our full names, but the identifying details were unmistakable. The author claimed that an estranged, jealous sister was faking a luxurious European getaway to siphon guests away from a prominent real estate heir's upcoming nuptials. The blog post painted me as a pathetic, bitter woman, desperately trying to ruin a beautiful union out of pure spite. Savannah thought public shame would break me. She firmly believed that exposing my supposed lies to the entire city would force me to cancel my plans and crawl back into the shadows. She wanted me humiliated, thinking the peer pressure of the local elite would crush my spirit. She could not have been more wrong. By feeding that story to the press, Savannah sealed her own fate. She guaranteed that every single socialite, business owner, and gossip columnist in the city of Nashville would be paying absolute attention on May 14th. She turned our family conflict into public entertainment. She thought she was building a pillory to punish me. Instead, she had just constructed a massive stadium, ensuring the entire city would be watching the exact moment my truth finally dropped, and her artificial empire burned to the ground. Standing by for your feedback before proceeding to Section 7. 7 days before the 14th of May, the diverging timelines of our family reached a brutal contrast. A freak, unseasonal heat wave struck the southern United States. The temperature in eastern Tennessee soared to an oppressive 104 degrees. The humidity wrapped around Nashville like a wet, heavy blanket. Savannah had insisted on an outdoor reception to accommodate the swelling guest list. Her sprawling canvas structure on the country club lawn essentially became a giant greenhouse. The trapped air inside the venue reached dangerous levels, melting the decorative wax seals on her place cards and wilting her expensive imported centerpieces before they could even be arranged. The venue manager issued a blunt warning to my father. Without emergency industrial air conditioning, the reception would be a severe health hazard. Darren had already exhausted the bridge loan I provided. The remaining funds had vanished into floral upgrades and the down payment for the steakhouse rehearsal dinner. When the climate control vendor presented the emergency invoice, the total came to $40,000. Darren stood in the sweltering heat of the country club parking lot, wiping his forehead with a damp handkerchief. He handed the vendor 3 different high-interest credit cards, praying the fragmented charges would clear his remaining limits. His hands shook as the machine processed the payments. The financial vice was tightening, squeezing the last drops of dignity from his chest. While my father was sweating through his tailored shirt in a Tennessee parking lot, Ethan and I stepped out of a private transport vehicle in the south of France. The Mediterranean breeze carried a perfect 72-degree temperature. The sky was an unbroken expanse of clear azure. The sensory details of the Château de la Roche were overwhelming. The air smelled of crushed lavender and wild rosemary. The ancient limestone walls felt cool and solid beneath my palms. Ethan walked beside me, running his hand along the wrought iron detailing of the main gate. He worked as an environmental engineer, spending his days designing sustainable water systems for rural communities. He possessed a deep reverence for things built to last. He grew up in a pragmatic household where actions held more weight than appearances. He understood the profound difference between flashing temporary wealth and holding true, enduring value. Watching him admire the historic architecture of the estate reaffirmed every decision I had made. The estate manager, a dignified local man named Henri, stood by the heavy wooden doors. "Welcome home, madame," he said, dipping his head in a respectful nod. The title resonated through my chest. I was not the flexible sister or the invisible logistics worker. I was the architect of my own sanctuary. 2 days later, our chartered heavy jet touched down on the tarmac in Nice. A fleet of sleek black transport vehicles met my curated guest list and drove them through the winding coastal roads toward the estate. When the convoy reached the cypress-lined driveway, the quiet chatter inside the cars ceased. Aunt Martha stepped out of her vehicle first. She adjusted her glasses, staring up at the towering iron gates and the pristine 17th-century fortress rising above the manicured vineyards. I stood on the front steps to greet them. Martha walked toward me, her eyes wide with undisguised awe. She did not ask if I had rented the space for the weekend. She looked at the permanence of the flawless grounds and the quiet authority in my posture. The society blog article Savannah had planted back home evaporated from their minds instantly. They realized the depth of the deception my sister had tried to pull. My cousins wandered through the grand foyer, tracing their fingers over antique tapestries and marveling at the soaring vaulted ceilings. There was no pity for the forgotten daughter. There was only profound respect for the woman who had built an empire in the dark. Back in Tennessee, the Montgomery illusion was cracking under the immense pressure of the heat and the mounting bills. Preston Montgomery's father, Lawrence, had scheduled a final walkthrough at the downtown steakhouse to finalize the rehearsal dinner menu. The steakhouse required the remaining balance to be paid in full prior to the event. Darren arrived at the meeting, looking haggard and desperate. When the restaurant manager presented the final bill, Darren attempted to use a corporate credit line linked to his failing timber business. The transaction was declined. Lawrence watched the red declined message flash across the payment terminal. A wealthy man recognizes the distinct scent of financial ruin. Lawrence demanded to speak with Darren in the lobby. The polite facade of their impending family merger shattered on the polished marble floor of the restaurant. Lawrence cornered my father, asking direct and brutal questions about the liquidity of the timber business and the true ownership of the Smoky Mountain Lake House. Darren stammered, his pride crumbling as he tried to invent new lies to cover the old ones. Lawrence did not care about saving face. He cared about protecting his own fragile credit. He realized Darren was financing the entire wedding on high-interest debt. The two patriarchs began turning on each other before the rehearsal dinner even started. Lawrence accused Darren of being a fraud. Darren fired back, questioning why the supposedly rich Montgomery family was not paying for the steakhouse themselves. The shouting match echoed through the lobby, witnessed by the waitstaff and a handful of early diners. The news traveled straight to Preston, who immediately turned his anger toward Savannah. The fairy tale romance dissolved into a bitter argument over unpaid invoices and deceit. Savannah sat in her childhood bedroom, the air conditioning struggling against the suffocating southern heat wave. Her fiancé was ignoring her calls. Her father was locked in his office fielding calls from angry creditors. Her grand society moment was rapidly transforming into a humiliating public spectacle. She needed a scapegoat to channel her venom. She picked up her phone and opened our text thread. "I hope your cheap little French picnic gets rained out," she typed. Her words were a desperate attempt to pull me back down into her chaotic reality. She wanted me to feel the same burning panic that was currently consuming her life. The notification chimed while I was sitting on the private terrace of my master suite. I read the single bitter line. I did not type a response. I did not feel the need to defend the clear skies above my head or the Michelin-starred chefs currently preparing dinner in my kitchens. I set my phone face down on a 400-year-old marble table. The cool stones silenced the device perfectly. I picked up a crystal glass of regional wine, took a slow sip, and watched the golden sun dip below the rolling hills of Provence. The eve of the 14th of May arrived, dividing the world into two fiercely contrasting realities. In downtown Nashville, the rehearsal dinner unfolded inside a high-end steakhouse. The historic heat wave was punishing the city infrastructure. The restaurant air conditioning units groaned and rattled, struggling to filter the humid air. Inside the private dining room, the temperature climbed steadily, mirroring the suffocating tension between the two families. Savannah sat at the head of the long oak table. Her designer silk dress clung uncomfortably to her skin. Beside her, Preston stared at his untouched whiskey glass. The Montgomery family occupied the left side of the room, their posture rigid. Lawrence Montgomery folded his arms over his chest, refusing to engage in polite conversation with my mother. Vivian attempted to fill the heavy silence with forced laughter and empty stories about the timber business, but her voice echoed hollowly against the brick walls. Darren sat near the entrance, his face pale and slick with sweat. The altercation from earlier in the day weighed heavily on his shoulders. He had managed to secure the private room only after pleading with the restaurant manager and writing a physical check for the remaining balance. He employed the same desperate tactic with the primary floral designer, a local artisan, who commanded high fees for her elaborate installations. He handed her a physical check that morning, assuring her the funds were secured. He underestimated the survival instincts of small business owners. The florist did not deposit the paper into a standard holding account. She drove directly to Darren's local bank branch to cash it against his ledger. The teller handed the paper back, shaking her head. Insufficient funds. The private dining room door swung open. The florist stood in the threshold. She did not look intimidated by the tailored suits or the glittering jewelry surrounding the table. She looked furious. She walked directly toward Darren, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. The hushed conversations in the room died instantly. Every eye turned to watch the impending disaster. The florist dropped the voided check onto the white tablecloth, right next to Darren's plate. The paper fluttered briefly before settling next to his dry-aged steak. "Your account is empty, Darren," she said. Her voice was calm, but loud enough for Lawrence Montgomery to hear every syllable. "I am pulling my crew from the country club immediately. You will not have a single flower at that reception tomorrow unless you hand me $25,000 in physical cash right now." The silence that followed was dense and crushing. Vivian dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. Savannah buried her face in her hands, her carefully constructed illusion shattering in real time. Darren stammered, reaching for his wallet in a pathetic display of panic. He offered to call his bank, inventing a lie about a frozen wire transfer or a temporary security hold. The florist simply turned around and walked out of the room. She was done playing games with a bankrupt patriarch. The fallout was instantaneous. Lawrence Montgomery stood up, tossing his linen napkin onto his chair. He looked at Darren with profound disgust. Preston grabbed Savannah by the arm, his grip tight, and pulled her toward the exit. Darren chased after his future son-in-law, his pride entirely broken. The argument erupted in the sweltering asphalt parking lot behind the restaurant. Preston confronted Darren under the flickering orange glow of a street lamp. The polished Southern gentleman routine evaporated. Preston demanded the truth about the timber fortune. He realized he was chaining himself to a family buried in high-interest debt. The screaming match echoed down the alleyway, a chaotic symphony of accusations, financial panic, and shattered egos. Darren was fighting to save a doomed wedding, completely unaware that his bounced check had just triggered a far more lethal mechanism. Hidden within the dense legal paperwork of the bridge loan he signed was the cross-default clause. When the bank flagged that floral check for insufficient funds, the automated systems at my corporate law firm registered the breach. The clause was no longer a dormant threat. It was an active execution order. Darren's $500,000 debt to my holding company accelerated instantly. The grace period vanished. My legal right to seize the Smoky Mountain Lake House was now active. He had funded his own execution. 4,000 miles away, the sun dipped below the rolling hills of the Rhone Valley, casting a long golden light over the chateau. The temperature settled into a crisp, comfortable evening. I hosted a welcome dinner in the central courtyard, seated beneath the ancient spreading branches of an olive tree. We did not require a stuffy private room or forced conversation. The atmosphere was fluid and joyous. My curated guests sat at a long, rustic wooden table lined with flickering taper candles and simple, elegant greenery. The scent of roasted lamb garlic and fresh rosemary drifted from the open kitchen windows. A local acoustic guitarist played softly in the corner, the notes weaving through the quiet laughter of the people I actually valued. Ethan sat beside me, pouring regional wine into my crystal glass. Aunt Martha was engaged in a lively debate with one of my lead software engineers. Uncle Henry was swapping stories with Ethan's father. There was no pretense here. No one was auditing their neighbor's net worth or judging the thread count of their garments. Seated directly across from me was a woman named Celine. She was the +1 of a prominent tech investor I had invited. Celine worked as a senior editor for a globally recognized bridal publication based in New York. She possessed a discerning eye for architecture and luxury, having covered high-profile events across the world. Throughout the dinner, I watched Celine examine the limestone walls, the intricate wrought iron balconies, and the flawless landscaping. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the wooden table. The candlelight caught the delicate gold jewelry at her wrists. Chelsea Celine began her voice carrying a genuine tone of professional awe. I have toured some of the most exclusive venues in Europe, but this property is breathtaking. The preservation of the 17th century stonework is remarkable. Which agency did you use to rent this estate? I would love to feature it in our autumn editorial spread. The courtyard grew quiet as the guests seated nearby paused their conversations to hear my answer. Aunt Martha looked at me, a proud, knowing smile forming on her lips. She already suspected there was more to my story than a simple logistics salary. I picked up my wineglass, feeling the cool crystal against my fingertips. I looked around the table at the faces of the people who had supported me when I was just a quiet girl building code in a cramped bedroom. I looked at Ethan, who nodded softly, giving me silent permission to drop the shield I had carried for so long. I did not rent this property, Celine, I said. My voice was steady, carrying clearly through the crisp night air. I bought it 2 years ago. The reaction was immediate and beautiful. A stunned silence hung in the air for 3 seconds before Aunt Martha let out a joyful, echoing laugh. She raised her glass high into the air. The rest of the table followed, a wave of awe-struck applause breaking out under the olive branches. Uncle Henry wiped a single tear from his eye. The software engineers who helped me build my company cheered, recognizing the ultimate physical manifestation of our endless late nights and grueling product launches. Celine sat back in her chair, her eyes wide with journalistic realization. She was not just attending a nice destination wedding. She was witnessing the quiet triumph of a woman who had outsmarted a toxic system. She asked if she could write an exclusive feature on the event. I smiled and granted her full permission. The contrast between the two realities was stark and poetic. I was being toasted under a canopy of French stars, surrounded by genuine warmth and enduring stone. My father was sweating in a toxic Tennessee parking lot, screaming at a furious real estate heir over unpaid bills. He was fighting tooth and nail to save an illusion, blind to the fact that his arrogant financial choices had just handed me the legal deed to his most cherished sanctuary. The trap had closed. The consequences were locked in place. And the sun was about to rise on the 14th of May. The 14th of May dawned over Nashville with the unforgiving intensity of an open furnace. The historic southern heatwave refused to break, holding the city hostage under a shimmering dome of stagnant humidity. By noon, the temperature gauge reading climbed past 105 degrees. The air hung thick and heavy, carrying the distinct scent of melting asphalt and impending disaster. Savannah had demanded dual swan ice sculptures to flank the entrance of her sprawling canvas reception tent on the country club lawn. Before the first confused guest even arrived to take their seat, the frozen birds were weeping rapidly into the manicured grass reduced to jagged puddles of tepid water. The melting swans were a perfect physical manifestation of the Montgomery merger. Darren had barely survived the rehearsal dinner catastrophe the night before. He managed to secure a backup diesel generator for the tent air conditioning by draining the very last of his business overdraft accounts. He thought he had bought a temporary reprieve from total humiliation. He was profoundly mistaken. The electrical load required to cool an enclosed structure of that magnitude against a triple-digit heat index was catastrophic. 30 minutes prior to the scheduled vow exchange, the overloaded diesel generator shrieked, sputtered, and died. The sudden mechanical silence was deafening. The massive cooling units ground to a halt. Within minutes, the interior of the heavy canvas tent transformed into a stagnant, humid sauna. The heat trapped beneath the fabric became dangerous. The elaborate floral centerpieces wilted instantly, their expensive imported petals curling inward as if trying to escape the oppressive atmosphere. The towering 6-tier fondant cake began to list to one side, the sugar icing sweating and sliding down the ornate structural tiers. Savannah sat sequestered in the bridal suite, trapped inside 50 pounds of heavy beaded tulle and restrictive corsetry. Her meticulously applied makeup began to slide down her flushed cheeks. Panic set in as the venue coordinator delivered the news about the power failure. Preston paced the hallway outside his tailored tuxedo jacket, already discarded in the sweltering heat. The Montgomery family huddled in a shaded corner of the veranda, fanning themselves with luxury cardstock programs. Their expressions were sour, unforgiving, and deeply embarrassed. Preston burst into the bridal suite, bypassing the polite boundaries of wedding tradition. He did not offer words of comfort to his panicked bride. He pointed a trembling finger at Darren, demanding to know why the venue was a literal oven, and why the floral vendor from the previous night was currently threatening to repossess the remaining altar arrangements. Savannah screamed at her groom, defending her ruined aesthetics, blaming his family for rushing the timeline, and demanding an outdoor spectacle. Their first hour of impending marriage was consumed by bitter accusations, ruined luxury, and the suffocating heat of undeniable financial ruin. The golden child was sweating in the dark, surrounded by hostile in-laws and unpaid vendors, her royal fantasy collapsing into a nightmare. Across the Atlantic Ocean, the 14th of May unfolded with breathtaking grace. The afternoon sun in Provence hung low in a cloudless cerulean sky, casting a warm golden hue over the ancient limestone walls of the Château de la Roche. A gentle Mediterranean breeze drifted through the valley, carrying the fragrant scent of blooming wild roses and crushed thyme. I stood in the primary suite, looking into a towering antique mirror. I did not wear layers of heavy tulle or ostentatious crystal embellishments. My custom gown was crafted from fluid ivory silk, engineered with architectural precision. It moved like water. It was a garment that did not need to shout to command the room. My Uncle Henry offered his arm to escort me down the aisle. We walked out into the central courtyard. The pathway was woven with fresh wild roses and deep green olive branches. The Parisian string quartet played a delicate arrangement that seemed to weave directly into the historic stones around us. I looked toward the altar. Ethan stood waiting, framed by the towering iron gates and the endless rolling vineyards beyond. As I stepped onto the stone pathway, I watched his composed demeanor fracture in the most beautiful way. Tears slipped silently down his cheeks. He did not bother to wipe them away. He looked at me with a profound reverence that no amount of leveraged credit could ever purchase. I was stepping into a sunlit legacy built entirely on my own quiet endurance. There were no flashing cameras from hired local paparazzi, no frantic whispers about bounced checks, and no suffocating tension. There was only the solid, enduring truth of the life we had constructed. We exchanged our vows under the open French sky, promising to protect the sanctuary we had found in each other. We walked back up the aisle as husband and wife, showered in dried lavender tossed by the people who genuinely cherished our presence. As the evening transitioned into a vibrant twilight, my reception began beneath the stars. The Michelin-starred culinary team began presenting courses of delicate regional cuisine, serving Wagyu beef and truffle infusions on antique porcelain. Crystal glasses clinked in genuine celebration. Laughter drifted through the illuminated courtyard, mingling with the soft notes of a jazz ensemble. It was the perfect atmosphere to initiate the final phase of my strategy. I caught the eye of my cousin Rebecca, seated near Aunt Martha. Rebecca was a sharp, corporate communications director who understood the precise mechanics of digital leverage. Earlier in the week, I had handed her a highly specific set of instructions. I did not need to broadcast my own victory. A self-proclaimed triumph can be dismissed as bragging, but a third-party observation is treated as objective reality. Rebecca nodded at me, a sharp, knowing glint in her eye. She casually picked up her smartphone from the rustic wooden table. She did not take a simple photograph. She opened her social media application and initiated a high-definition live broadcast. She slowly panned the camera lens across the breathtaking scenery. She captured the ancient, illuminated stonework of the fortress, the elite Parisian musicians playing in the background, and the long tables lined with rare, imported orchids. She focused the lens on me, radiant and unbothered, laughing with my new husband, in a setting that rivaled European royalty. Rebecca did not leave the audience to chance. She systematically tagged every single aunt, uncle, cousin, and prominent family friend residing in the Nashville area. She tagged the local society bloggers who had published Savannah's fabricated smear piece. She tagged the Montgomery Family Network. She dropped a digital beacon directly into the center of the sweltering disaster unfolding in Tennessee. The notification pinged across hundreds of devices simultaneously. I knew exactly what was happening back home. The guests, trapped in that dark, suffocating country club tent, miserable and sweating through their formal wear, were currently reaching for their glowing screens to seek any distraction from the oppressive heat. They were about to open a digital window into a pristine, $14 million reality. The trap was springing shut, and the entire city of Nashville was holding a front-row ticket to the execution. While I danced under the clear French stars, the digital shockwave detonated across the Atlantic Ocean. I would later learn the exact sequence of events from multiple attendees who gleefully recounted the collapse of the Montgomery merger. The interior of Savannah's sprawling canvas tent felt like the inside of a stagnant lung. 300 members of Southern high society sat in oppressive, humid darkness. The backup generator remained dead. The catering staff, terrified and drenched in perspiration, attempted to serve the primary dinner course using the dim, ambient glow of battery-operated emergency lanterns. They placed plates of tepid, rubbery chicken in front of guests who were too nauseated by the trapped heat to even lift their silver forks. The air smelled of melting sugar, damp wool suits, and profound regret. Then, the first notification chimed. It started at a table near the back entrance. A sharp electronic ping cut through the low, miserable murmur of the room. A second later, 3 more phones chimed in unison. Then, a dozen. Within 60 seconds, a cascading symphony of digital alerts rippled across the dark venue. The guests eagerly reached into their pockets and designer clutches, desperate for any distraction from their sweltering reality. The bright, rectangular screens illuminated their sweat-streaked faces in the dark. They tapped the notification link provided by my cousin Rebecca. Her live broadcast buffered for a fraction of a second before flooding their devices with crisp, high-definition resolution. Rebecca possessed an excellent eye for cinematography. She did not just point the lens at me. She utilized her device to capture the sheer monumental scale of my environment. Her camera swept across the illuminated 17th century courtyard. She captured the waitstaff wearing tailored uniforms, pouring rare vintage wine into crystal goblets. She zoomed in on the renowned Parisian string quartet, playing a flawless symphony under the ancient olive branches. She captured Celine, the famous New York bridal editor, laughing openly with my software engineers. The guests in Tennessee recognized Celine instantly. Her presence on the screen validated the entire event. This was not a cheap rented illusion. This was undeniable, staggering wealth. Then Rebecca's camera found me. I was walking hand in hand with Ethan through the stone archways. I wore my custom fluid silk gown, glowing under the European moonlight. I looked radiant, unbothered, and immune to the petty local dramas of Nashville. I was existing in an entirely different stratosphere. Preston Montgomery stood near the ruined head table. He pulled his device from his tuxedo pocket and tapped the link. The vivid colors of the French countryside glared back at him. Savannah hovered over his shoulder, squinting at the bright screen. The visual data hit her optic nerve before her brain could process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. She watched her supposedly poor, invisible older sister command an estate that dwarfed the Montgomery real estate portfolio. Savannah held a warm flute of cheap Prosecco in her right hand. Her fingers spasmed. The glass slipped from her grip, plummeting toward the wooden dance floor. The sharp crack of shattering crystal echoed over the silent crowd. "She rented a castle to spite me," Savannah shrieked. Her voice cracked, shrill and frantic. "She is faking it! She took out fraudulent loans to build a fake set. Do not look at it!" She demanded the attention returned to her, but her guests refused to look away from their screens. The contrast was too poetic to ignore. The local socialites, the exact people my mother had sacrificed me to impress, clustered together in the dark tent, holding their phones up like digital beacons. They were actively ignoring Savannah's wedding to attend mine virtually. The pity they had once reserved for the forgotten sister mutated instantly into deep reverence, while their admiration for the golden child dissolved into silent mockery. Lawrence Montgomery did not care about the social gossip. He was a ruthless commercial predator, obsessed with leverage and assets. He stared at his own device, analyzing the limestone architecture, the bespoke floral installations cascading from the balconies, and the undeniable capital required to host an event of that magnitude. He performed a rapid mental calculation. He realized the true wealth in our family did not belong to Darren. It belonged to the daughter Darren had discarded. Lawrence slowly lowered his phone. He turned to face my father. Darren was sitting slumped in his chair, wiping his forehead with a soggy linen napkin, watching his empire burn down in real time. Lawrence did not whisper. He projected his deep baritone voice so the surrounding tables could hear every single syllable of the execution. "You drained your accounts to build this swamp?" Lawrence sneered, gesturing toward the melting ice sculptures in the dark, humid ceiling, "while your other daughter is literal royalty." Darren opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words materialized. He had no defense. He was financially and socially naked. Lawrence realized his family had aligned themselves with the wrong sister. Preston thought he was marrying into the primary inheritance, only to discover the real treasure was alienated and forever inaccessible. The Montgomerys had anchored their sinking ship to a man who was already drowning. The embarrassment was total and unforgiving. Vivian sat paralyzed in her seat, clutching her ruined silk wrap. Her vanity was stripped away in front of the country club elite she worshipped. She realized her friends were watching the broadcast, whispering behind their hands, comparing the miserable reality they currently occupied with the breathtaking European fantasy I had constructed. My parents were publicly humiliated on the grandest scale possible. They had traded their dignity for a front-row seat to their own destruction. Before the screens went dark, Preston turned to look at his new wife. Savannah was a portrait of ruined vanity. Her expensive makeup was smeared down her cheeks, mixed with tears of pure rage. Her heavy beaded dress was stained with sweat and spilled Prosecco. Preston looked from her to the black screen of his phone, processing the catastrophic error in his judgment. He had overlooked the quiet logistics manager because she drove a modest car and wore practical clothing. He failed to recognize the apex predator hiding in plain sight. He married the loud, demanding sister, assuming she held the keys to the kingdom, only to realize she was just a loud beggar draped in borrowed jewels. Preston did not offer Savannah a comforting embrace. He did not assure her that their love was more important than the ruined aesthetics. He simply turned his back on her and walked toward the exit of the tent, leaving his bride standing alone among the puddles of melted ice and shattered glass. Savannah screamed his name, but her voice was swallowed by the hum of the murmuring crowd. Darren watched his new son-in-law abandon his daughter. He tried to stand to chase after Preston and salvage the merger, but his legs refused to hold his weight. The sheer gravity of his financial decisions anchored him to his chair. He remembered the crisp, commercial-grade promissory note he had signed without reading. He remembered the $500,000 bridge loan he took from me, the loan he secured using the Smoky Mountain Lake House as collateral. The florist had bounced a check earlier that day. The cross-default clause was active. Darren placed his head in his hands, realizing the true cost of his arrogance. He did not just lose his social standing. He had handed the deed of his beloved sanctuary directly to the daughter he had tried to erase. The live stream was merely the visual representation of his defeat. The legal reality waiting for him on Monday morning would be far more devastating. Back in Provence, Rebecca walked toward the main entrance of the chateau. She framed the final shot of her broadcast with deliberate care. The camera tilted upward, capturing the grand limestone facade of the Château de la Roche. The towering wrought iron gates stood resolute and unyielding against the starry night sky. The image conveyed permanence, strength, and silent victory. Rebecca smiled into the camera, whispered a quiet goodbye, and ended the stream. The screens in Nashville faded to black, plunging the wedding guests back into the sweltering, humid darkness of their chosen reality. The digital window closed, leaving them trapped in the nightmare my family had purchased. The snare I had carefully woven over the past year was now pulled tight. The trap had officially closed. 6 in the morning arrived in Provence with a quiet, breathtaking stillness. The sky above the Rhone Valley shifted from bruised violet to pale, shimmering gold. I stood on the private stone balcony of the primary suite, wrapped in a thick cotton robe. The air held a crisp chill, carrying the scent of damp earth and the blooming lavender fields stretching out toward the horizon. Inside the room, Ethan slept peacefully, his breathing a steady, rhythmic hum against the pristine white linen sheets. I rested my forearms against the wrought iron railing, holding a ceramic mug of black coffee. The heat from the cup seeped into my palms. Below me, the chateau grounds were silent, save for the gentle crunch of gravel as the estate groundskeeper began his morning rounds. It was a picture of absolute enduring tranquility. Then the silence shattered. My phone vibrated against the surface of the small marble bistro table. The harsh mechanical buzzing disrupted the morning peace. I glanced at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed a single name: Vivian. I did not feel a spike of adrenaline. My pulse remained low and steady. I picked up the device, tapped the green icon, and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not offer a greeting. I simply waited. "Chelsea!" my mother shrieked. Her voice was unrecognizable. The polished southern drawl she spent decades perfecting for the country club ladies had evaporated. Her tone was raw, raspy, and fractured from hours of weeping and screaming. She sounded like a woman standing in the wreckage of a collapsed building, suffocating on the dust of her own ruined ego.
"How could you do this to us?" Vivian demanded, her breathing ragged. "You humiliated this family. You ruined your sister's life. Savannah is locked in the bathroom, crying her eyes out because Preston left the venue."
The Montgomerys walked out before the cake was even cut. Half the guests spent the entire evening staring at their phones, whispering about your little stunt in Europe. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the dark roasted liquid warm my throat. I did not interrupt her. I let her exhaust her lungs, observing the frantic rattling of a woman whose carefully curated narrative was disintegrating.
"Do you have any idea how much debt you just placed on your own shoulders?" Vivian continued, her voice pitching higher in a desperate attempt to regain control. "Taking out fraudulent loans to rent some French movie set just to show up your own flesh and blood? You are sick, Chelsea. You bankrupted your future just to spite Savannah. You are going to spend the rest of your life paying off a single night of fake luxury."
Her accusation revealed the exact parameters of her worldview. Vivian possessed a transactional soul. She categorized every human being by their visible net worth and their social utility. She married my father for his timber company, viewing him as a stable financial vehicle to elevate her own status. She raised Savannah to be a decorative trophy, a commodity to be traded into a wealthier dynasty. She relegated me to the role of the reliable pack mule, the boring logistics worker, expected to carry their burdens and fund their excesses. In Vivian's mind, it was mathematically impossible for the pack mule to acquire a crown. Therefore, I must be faking it. She needed to believe I had destroyed my own financial standing to rent the chateau. If she admitted that my wealth was real, she would have to face the terrifying truth that she had spent 30 years nurturing the wrong daughter. She was clinging to the illusion of my poverty because it was the only raft left floating in her sinking reality. She paused to pull in a sharp, wet breath. The line buzzed with the faint static of an international connection. "Are you finished?" I asked. My voice was surgical and calm, carrying no anger and no pity. Vivian let out a strangled sob. "You need to call Aunt Martha and tell her the truth, Chelsea. You need to confess that you rented that place and you are drowning in debt. We can salvage the Montgomery relationship if we prove you are just an unhinged, jealous sister." I lowered my coffee mug to the table. The ceramic base clicked softly against the marble. "I did not rent it, Mom," I said. The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, the hostility in her voice faltering, replaced by a creeping edge of confusion.
"I own it," I replied,
Enunciating every syllable with deliberate precision. "I bought the estate 2 years ago. I paid $14 million in a single cash wire transfer. I did not take out a loan. I did not stretch my budget. I purchased it using a fraction of the payout I received when I sold my data infrastructure company to a global conglomerate." The silence on the line was profound. It was not just a pause in the conversation. It was the heavy, crushing sound of an entire worldview shattering into microscopic fragments. I could picture her standing in the dark ruins of the Nashville reception tent, her phone pressed against her ear, her brain misfiring as it tried to process the sheer magnitude of the information. The daughter she had mocked for driving an old sedan was a multimillionaire. The daughter she had exiled to the shadows had been orchestrating a global empire while she was busy haggling over cheap floral centerpieces. "You own it," Vivian breathed. The arrogance that had defined her entire existence was gone. It was replaced by raw, unadulterated terror. She realized the fatal error her family had committed. They had abused, alienated, and discarded the only person holding actual power. They traded genuine generational wealth for a cheap, disastrous illusion with the Montgomery family. The social ladder she had spent decades climbing had just snapped beneath her feet, and she was in freefall. "Yes," I said, "I own it, and I am going to step inside now to have breakfast with my husband. Do not call this number again." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I did not wait to hear her reaction. I tapped the red icon, severing the connection. I stood on the balcony for another minute, watching the morning mist burn away under the rising French sun. The air felt incredibly light. The toxic gravitational pull of my family was permanently broken. I turned and walked back into the warmth of the primary suite. Ethan was stirring the sunlight, catching the gold band on his left hand. I smiled, ready to begin the first true day of my new life. But while the sun was rising over my sanctuary in Europe, midnight was striking in Tennessee. The social embarrassment my parents suffered in the sweltering tent was merely the opening act of their destruction. They were busy mourning their ruined reputation, completely unaware that the digital banking systems in their home state were currently running their automated nightly updates. Darren's bounced check from the rehearsal dinner was processing through the corporate clearinghouses. The digital tripwire hidden deep within my promissory note was waking up. The cross-default clause was no longer a threat. It was an active execution order. The social fallout was complete, but the true financial reckoning was scheduled to hit them the moment the banks opened on Monday morning. 3 days after the disastrous weekend, the financial reckoning hit Nashville with the force of a Category 5 hurricane. The dust from the sweltering country club reception had barely settled when the banking clearinghouses processed the weekend transactions. On Wednesday morning, the automated accounting systems at the Grand Bell Country Club attempted to authorize the final payment for the catering, the damaged canvas tent, and the emergency cleanup crews. The transaction hit Darren's depleted accounts and bounced back instantly. The venue manager did not offer a polite grace period. He instructed the country club legal team to draft a formal demand letter. They threatened immediate litigation, not only for breach of contract, but for the extensive property damage caused by the leaking diesel generator and the waterlogged lawn. The caterers, the lighting technicians, and the rental companies followed suit. Darren's phone rang incessantly, a relentless chorus of angry creditors demanding their money. The scandal radiated outward, penetrating the walls of the Montgomery family compound. Lawrence Montgomery possessed the survival instincts of a cornered predator. He recognized that Darren's financial collapse was highly contagious. The Nashville Whisper Network was already feasting on the details of the ruined reception and the shocking revelation of my hidden European estate. Lawrence knew his own commercial real estate empire was heavily leveraged.
He could not afford to have his family name anchored to a bankrupt timber baron. Lawrence took immediate and ruthless action. He summoned his corporate attorneys and initiated a total financial severance. He legally blocked Preston from accessing the primary family trust accounts. He removed his son as a signatory on the business credit lines and canceled the black cards Preston used to fund his lavish lifestyle. Lawrence essentially amputated his own son to stop the infection from spreading to the core of the Montgomery assets. The newlywed fantasy evaporated in less than 72 hours. Preston and Savannah were sitting in a leased downtown luxury condominium, surrounded by unopened wedding gifts and wilting floral arrangements they had stolen from the ruined reception. When Preston swiped his card to order a simple grocery delivery, the transaction was denied. He called his father, only to be informed by a cold legal assistant that his accounts were frozen until further notice. Preston turned his profound panic directly onto his new wife. He realized Savannah was not an heiress to a vast timber fortune. She was a financial liability, carrying the toxic weight of her father's debts. Savannah screamed back, realizing Preston was entirely dependent on his father's allowance and possessed zero actual wealth of his own. The golden child and the arrogant heir were trapped in a high-rise apartment with no liquid cash, no income, and a mountain of unpaid vendor invoices bearing their names. Their supposed fairy tale dissolved into vicious shouting matches that echoed down the sleek condominium hallway. Back at the Timber Lodge, the atmosphere was suffocating. Vivian spent her days lying on the living room sofa in a catatonic state of denial, the curtains drawn tight to block out the Tennessee sun. She refused to answer calls from her country club friends. Her social currency was bankrupt. Darren sat trapped in his home office, staring at a towering stack of past due notices and legal threats. The reality of his situation was inescapable. He had liquidated his retirement, drained his business accounts, and ruined his reputation to fund a wedding that lasted less than 3 hours before imploding. He was cornered. His brain frantically searched for a miraculous escape route. He remembered the phone call Vivian had made on Sunday morning. He remembered her hysterical confession that I was not a struggling logistics worker, but the sole owner of a $14 million French fortress. Darren did not feel remorse for how he had treated me. He did not feel the crushing guilt of a father who had alienated his own child. He felt a sudden, desperate surge of predatory hope. In his twisted logic, my newfound wealth was the ultimate safety net. He convinced himself that family loyalty would override decades of neglect. He believed he could smooth over the tension with a few flattering words and tap into my resources to save his crumbling empire. He picked up his phone and dialed my international number. I was sitting in the grand library of the Château de la Roche. The morning light filtered through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The room smelled of old paper, leather bindings, and fresh espresso. I was wearing a simple cashmere sweater, enjoying the quiet companionship of my husband, who was reading a novel on the adjacent velvet sofa. My phone vibrated on the heavy oak desk. I looked at the screen. I knew Darren would eventually call. It was a mathematical certainty. Desperate men always return to the wells they previously poisoned. I tapped the screen and accepted the call. I did not speak. Chelsea's sweetheart Darren began. His tone was instantly nauseating. The cold, arrogant patriarch who had dismissed my wedding dates and stolen my joy was gone. In his place was a sycophantic beggar, using a childhood nickname he had not uttered in 2 decades. The sheer audacity of his greeting hung in the transatlantic connection. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to endure the awkwardness of his own forced affection. It has been a very chaotic week here in Nashville, Darren continued, his voice adopting a strained conversational lightness. The venue had some unexpected electrical issues, and the vendors are being incredibly unreasonable about their timelines. We are in a bit of a tight bind right now.
Your mother mentioned that you purchased a rather impressive property over there in Europe. He paused, waiting for me to seek his approval or brag about my accomplishments. I offered him nothing.
Well, Darren stammered, clearly unsettled by my lack of response.
Since you own that incredible estate outright, you clearly have significant equity. I was thinking, just to help the family clear up this little misunderstanding with the country club, maybe you could take out a small mortgage on the chateau. You could wire the funds here, and I will pay the monthly note through the timber company. It would be a simple transaction to save our family name.
I stared at the intricate grain of the oak desk beneath my fingertips. The psychological entitlement was staggering. He had spent his entire life viewing me purely as a disposable resource. Even now, knowing I had built an 8-figure fortune entirely without his support, his first instinct was to demand I mortgage my sanctuary to pay for Savannah's ruined vanity project. He wanted me to put a lien on my home to bail out the people who had tried to erase me. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not unleash 30 years of suppressed anger. Emotional outbursts are for people who lack leverage. I reached across the desk and picked up a crisp manila folder. I opened it slowly. Inside rested the commercial promissory note my corporate attorneys had drafted. I smoothed my hand over the final page, my fingers tracing the ink of his digital signature. "Dad," I said smoothly, my voice carrying the crisp, cool authority of a chief executive officer. "I will not be mortgaging my home." Darren exhaled a sharp breath. "Now, Chelsea, you have to understand the pressure we are under. We are family. You cannot just hoard your wealth while we lose everything." I cut him off before he could launch into another desperate monologue. "I will not be mortgaging my home," I repeated. "But we do need to discuss the $500,000 you currently owe me from the bridge loan." The line went dead silent. The sycophantic warmth evaporated from his throat. The reality of his prior financial choices collided violently with his present desperation. He had forgotten about the bridge loan in the chaos of the wedding fallout. He had pushed the $500,000 debt to the back of his mind, assuming he could manipulate his naive tech-nerd daughter into forgiving the balance. He was about to learn that he was not speaking to a naive daughter. He was speaking to his primary creditor, and the grace period had officially expired. The heavy silence stretched across the transatlantic connection. I listened to the shallow, rapid breathing echoing through the receiver. Darren was sitting in his home office thousands of miles away, calculating the depth of the grave he had just dug for himself. When he finally found his voice, the sycophantic warmth had vanished entirely. The polite mask dissolved, leaving only the desperate, cornered patriarch. "I cannot pay that right now," Darren barked. His tone was sharp and coded in panic. "You know the timber business is struggling. You know I drained my accounts for Savannah's wedding. Just forgive the loan, Chelsea. Write it off. It is a paper debt to you anyway. You are sitting in a $14 million estate. You do not need the cash." He was trying to minimize his obligation by weaponizing my success against me. He believed that because my net worth dwarfed his own, he was entitled to a $500,000 charitable donation. In his mind, my wealth erased his accountability. He viewed the legal contract he signed as a trivial family favor that could be discarded the moment it became inconvenient. I did not raise my voice. I leaned back in my leather chair inside the chateau library, listening to the soft rustle of the wind against the arched glass windows. I placed my index finger on the crisp manila folder resting on my desk. I traced the black ink of his digital signature at the bottom of the promissory note. "I do not forgive debts used to disrespect me, Darren," I said softly. My words were precise and hollow, devoid of any daughterly affection. "You did not borrow that money to survive. You took it to fund a toxic illusion. You used my capital to purchase ice sculptures and designer linens for a sister who spent her entire engagement trying to humiliate me.
You spent my money to impress a family that abandoned you the second your accounts ran dry. Darren let out a harsh breath. We can negotiate a payment plan, he pleaded, shifting his strategy from demanding forgiveness to begging for time. I will send you monthly installments. We can restructure the terms. I just need a few months to liquidate some equipment and get the business ledger back in the black. You do not have a few months, I replied. The promissory note you signed defaults today. What are you talking about? Darren stammered. The repayment date is not until the end of August. We agreed on August. We agreed on a contract containing a standard commercial cross-default clause, I explained. I kept my tone even and instructional, resembling a university professor explaining a basic economic principle to a failing student. The legal provision dictates that if you fail to meet any related financial obligation, the primary debt accelerates immediately. The grace period evaporates. The full balance becomes payable upon demand. Darren was quiet. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to decipher the corporate terminology. On Friday evening, I continued, you handed a physical check to your primary floral designer. On Saturday morning, that vendor attempted to cash your check at your local bank branch. The transaction was denied due to insufficient funds. When that check bounced, your financial breach was logged into the regional banking system. My corporate attorneys monitor these registries automatically. You defaulted on a vendor payment directly related to the wedding event. Therefore, the cross-default clause triggered. Your $500,000 loan accelerated this morning. You owe my holding company the entire balance by 5 o'clock on Friday. The blood drained from his face. I could sense the visceral shock radiating through the phone. He had never bothered to read the fine print. He had been so blinded by his own hubris and the urgent need to secure cash that he blindly authorized a lethal financial snare. I do not have $500,000, Darren whispered. His voice was fragile and thin. I cannot pay it by Friday. I am aware of your liquid assets, Darren, I said. That is exactly why my legal team required you to secure the bridge loan with a tangible asset. I let the statement hang in the air. I wanted him to connect the dots himself. I wanted him to experience the exact moment the trap snapped shut around his most prized possession. The Smoky Mountain Lake house was not just a piece of real estate. It was the physical embodiment of Darren's ego. The sprawling waterfront property had been passed down from his own father. It represented generational standing in the Tennessee elite. Darren spent his summers hosting local politicians and wealthy business owners on that pristine timber dock. He used the property to project an image of rugged affluence. It was his sanctuary and his ultimate status symbol. He loved that house far more than he loved his own wife or his daughters. No, Darren choked out. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. You cannot touch the lake house. It belongs to this family. It has been in our name for 4 decades. It belonged to you until you pledged it as collateral for a high-risk loan you could not afford. I corrected him. The deed is the security on the promissory note. Because you cannot produce the $500,000 by Friday, I am legally executing my right to seize the collateral. My holding company is taking ownership of the property to satisfy the debt. You would not dare, he gasped. The betrayal in his voice was thick and heavy. You are my own flesh and blood, Chelsea. You would not steal your grandfather's legacy just to prove a point. You stole my peace for 30 years just to elevate Savannah, I replied smoothly. Do not invoke family loyalty now. The ledger is simply balancing itself. And I already filed the paperwork. I listened to a ragged, frantic intake of breath on the other end of the line. Darren was hyperventilating. He was a man accustomed to bullying his way out of consequences. He relied on intimidation and Southern charm to navigate his failures. He had never faced an opponent who operated purely on cold, hard data and binding contracts. He had no leverage. He had no cash. He had no legal standing to fight the seizure. The foreclosure process on a commercial lien in our home state is a specific and unyielding mechanism. I explained the timeline to him with methodical precision. I told him my attorneys had submitted the notice of default to the county clerk that very morning. He would receive the certified legal documents in the mail within 3 business days. The slow, grueling 30-day legal eviction process had officially begun. I did not want him removed from the property overnight. A swift exit offers the mercy of immediate closure. I wanted him to endure the psychological torture of the countdown. I wanted him to wake up every single morning inside his beloved timber lodge, knowing the clock was ticking down to his ruin. For the next month, Darren would have to walk through the halls of his sanctuary, realizing he had traded the heirloom for a melted ice sculpture and a dark, sweltering tent. He would have to look at the pristine lake out his window and accept that his arrogant financial choices had stripped him of his identity. He had funded his own destruction, using my money. In return, I was legally amputating his most cherished asset.
You are destroying this family!
Darren sobbed. The sound of my father crying did not evoke a single ounce of sympathy within my chest. It merely sounded like the inevitable friction of consequence. You destroyed the family, Darren, I said softly. I am simply liquidating the remaining assets. I pressed the red icon on my screen and ended the call. I closed the manila folder on my desk and took a deep, cleansing breath. The legal machinery was locked into motion, and nothing could stop the impending transfer of the deed. But the quiet execution of a legal contract was not enough to balance the scales of justice. The true punishment for a family obsessed with social standing is public exposure. My father believed he could quietly pack his belongings and slip away from the lake house without the country club elite noticing his failure. He assumed the humiliation of the ruined wedding was the final act of his social demise. He was wrong. The Whisper Network in Nashville was insatiable. Preston Montgomery's mother was currently nursing a bruised ego and a deep hatred for my parents. She possessed a vast network of influential friends and a burning desire for vengeance. The news of the impending foreclosure was about to leak from the confines of the county clerk office directly into the manicured living rooms of the Tennessee high society. The private nightmare Darren was enduring was about to become public entertainment. The 30-day legal eviction clock ticked down with agonizing precision, but the true punishment did not occur inside the sterile confines of a county courtroom. It happened within the lavish dining rooms and manicured garden parties of Nashville high society. Preston Montgomery's mother, Madeline, was a woman who treated social standing as a ruthless blood sport. She was deeply mortified by the catastrophic reception and the subsequent financial exposure of her own family. To deflect the intense scrutiny away from her husband's leveraged commercial real estate portfolio, Madeline needed a convenient scapegoat. She found the perfect sacrificial lamb in my father. Madeline did not shout her grievances or post frantic messages online. She utilized the lethal efficiency of the Southern Whisper Network. She invited 3 prominent country club matriarchs to a private luncheon at her sprawling estate. Over crystal glasses of iced tea and delicate finger sandwiches, she casually mentioned that a trusted friend at the county clerk office had flagged a commercial foreclosure notice. She handed them copies of the public records detailing Darren's defaulted promissory note and the impending seizure of the Smoky Mountain Lake House. She painted my parents as elaborate grifters who had deliberately deceived the Montgomery dynasty to secure a fraudulent marriage. The rumor ignited like dry kindling in a drought. Within 48 hours, Darren's financial ruin was the primary topic of conversation at every local charity gala and exclusive fitness studio in the city. The country club elite, the exact demographic Vivian had sacrificed her soul to impress, turned their backs with staggering speed. When Vivian attempted to attend her regular Tuesday morning tennis clinic, she found her usual partners actively ignoring her presence. They turned their shoulders and shielded their conversations behind their hands when she approached the court. By Wednesday morning, she received a cold, formal email uninviting her from the upcoming summer hospital charity ball. Her social currency evaporated entirely, leaving her isolated and humiliated inside the gloomy timber lodge. The fallout rained down on Savannah with equal severity. My sister had spent years cultivating a lucrative digital lifestyle brand. She built an online persona predicated on immense generational wealth and effortless Southern elegance. She relied on local sponsorships from boutique clothing stores and luxury cosmetic salons to fund her daily expenses. After the disastrous wedding weekend she attempted to carry on, as if the humiliating reception never happened, she posted a heavily filtered photograph of herself sitting in the leased downtown condominium, holding a designer coffee cup paired with a hollow, uplifting caption about embracing beautiful new beginnings. The digital response was immediate and merciless. Her followers had seen the viral broadcast of my European ceremony. They had read the anonymous society blog posts detailing the melted swan ice sculptures, the failed diesel generator, and the bounced vendor checks. The comment section under her photograph transformed into a brutal interrogation. Users openly mocked her for pretending to be a wealthy heiress while her parents were actively being evicted from their prized lake house. They asked if the cheap apartment was her new permanent castle. Local sponsors quietly terminated their affiliate contracts within hours, terrified of associating their retail brands with a highly public financial scandal. Savannah watched her follower count hemorrhage in real time. She was no longer perceived as a glamorous socialite marrying into old money. She was the fraudulent girl who threw a ruined party in a sweltering dark tent while her parents went bankrupt. The Montgomery heir she had fought so hard to secure was currently sleeping in the spare bedroom of their apartment, treating her with open disdain and ignoring her tears. Her digital empire crumbled, crushed under the weight of the undeniable truth. While my family navigated their profound local disgrace, a different narrative was preparing to launch on a global scale. Celine, the prominent bridal editor who attended my reception, proved to be incredibly efficient at her craft. 2 months after the event, the autumn issue of her internationally renowned publication hit the newsstands. The magazine was a thick, glossy compilation of the most exclusive matrimonial events on the planet, revered as the ultimate authority in luxury weddings. Celine did not just feature a single photograph of my ceremony. She dedicated a sprawling 10-page spread to the event. The headline was printed in bold, elegant typography across the glossy paper. A tech founder's secret Provence fairy tale. The article detailed every exquisite aspect of the weekend. Celine described the $14 million limestone fortress, the Michelin-starred culinary execution, and the rare imported floral installations cascading down the ancient staircases. She highlighted my fluid custom silk gown and the quiet, enduring strength of my relationship with Ethan. Crucially, the editorial piece emphasized the fact that I was an independent technology executive who had built my fortune entirely on my own merit. Celine celebrated my quiet competence and my deliberate refusal to engage in loud, ostentatious displays of wealth. The journalist explicitly contrasted my serene, authentic celebration with the hollow, chaotic nature of typical Southern excess. The subtle jab at Savannah's ruined aesthetic was baked into every single paragraph. The physical distribution of the magazine guaranteed maximum psychological impact. It was not just available in premium boutiques in New York or Los Angeles. It was stocked in the checkout aisles of every grocery store, pharmacy, and upscale bookstore across Tennessee. Savannah could not escape it. Every time she walked into her local market to purchase essential groceries, she was forced to stare at the vibrant cover image. She had to stand in line clutching her plastic shopping basket, looking at the physical proof of my supremacy shining under the harsh fluorescent lighting. My victory was inescapable, staring back at her from the glossy racks while she counted her remaining debit card balance. The visual evidence of my triumph finally broke Vivian's stubborn denial. Sitting alone in the dark timber lodge, waiting for the county sheriff to arrive and enforce the impending lake house eviction, my mother reached for her laptop. She typed out a long, desperate email. She did not send a text message, knowing I would likely ignore a short notification. She drafted a sprawling, frantic plea for forgiveness, her words dripping with manufactured sentimentality. I was sitting at the heavy oak desk in the chateau library when the message arrived in my secure inbox. The room smelled of old leather bindings and fresh espresso. I clicked the subject line and read the contents. Vivian attempted one final clumsy manipulation. She claimed she had been blinded by the intense stress of the wedding planning. She wrote that she always knew I was destined for greatness, and that my incredible success in the technology sector proved she had raised a strong, resilient daughter. She essentially tried to claim credit for the very endurance I built to survive her neglect. She begged me to call her, promising that we could heal the fractured family dynamic if I would just open my heart and provide a small financial lifeline to save them from total ruin. She wanted me to absolve her guilt. She wanted me to validate her pathetic attempt to rewrite history. She needed me to engage in an emotional argument because any response from my end would prove she still held some tiny fragment of power over my emotional state. I did not type a reply. I did not block her email address, nor did I pick up my phone to scream at her. Anger requires energy, and she was no longer worth a single joule of my output. I simply closed the application, leaving the message suspended in the cold, digital void. Silence is the most devastating weapon you can deploy against a narcissist. It deprives them of the oxygen they desperately need to survive. By refusing to acknowledge her existence, I confirmed her absolute irrelevance to my future. I let the crushing silence and the undeniable public record of their failure do the talking. I turned my attention back to the thick stack of legal documents resting on my desk. The 30-day foreclosure window had officially closed that morning. Darren had failed to produce the $500,000. He had exhausted every possible extension. My corporate attorneys had executed the final judgment with ruthless efficiency. The deed to the Smoky Mountain Lake House was now legally registered under my holding company. I did not plan to keep the property as a vacation home. The wooden floors and the sprawling waterfront docks were saturated with toxic memories and unearned arrogance. I reached for my silver fountain pen and signed a new stack of binding legal transfers. I was moving the prized asset out of the holding company and transferring the deed directly into an irrevocable philanthropic trust. I was preparing the board for my final calculated move. My family had worshipped that property as a monument to their own vanity, and I was about to dismantle their temple entirely to serve a much higher purpose. 6 months after the disastrous events of May 14th, the dust finally settled over the Nashville social landscape. The grand illusions my family fought so hard to protect had crumbled into fine ash, leaving behind a cold and undeniable reality. The legal dissolution of Savannah and Preston Montgomery took significantly less time to finalize than the planning of their ruined reception. There were no flashing cameras or society reporters waiting outside the courthouse. Their marriage ended in a sterile, windowless conference room in downtown Nashville. Preston sat on one side of a polished mahogany table, his posture rigid and his eyes focused entirely on the exit door. Savannah sat opposite him, holding a cheap plastic pen, staring at the thick stack of legal documents resting between them. She signed the divorce decree without shedding a single tear. The romantic foundation of their relationship had always been a shallow facade, built on the fragile assumption of mutual wealth and limitless social capital.
The moment Lawrence Montgomery froze his son's trust fund and my father's bankruptcy became public knowledge, the romantic facade evaporated. The couple had no assets to divide. They were left with nothing but high-interest credit card bills, ruined credit scores, and a mountain of mutual resentment. Savannah packed her remaining designer clothes into cardboard boxes and moved out of the leased high-rise condominium. She did not return to the sprawling timber lodge of our childhood because that property no longer belonged to our parents. Darren and Vivian were forced to face the brutal arithmetic of their own arrogance. Following the legal seizure of the Smoky Mountain Lake House, the remaining creditors circled their sinking timber business like starved vultures. The country club sued for breach of contract, freezing Darren's remaining commercial accounts. Unable to secure new lines of credit to cover their mounting legal fees and past due property taxes, my parents had to put the primary timber lodge on the open market. They sold it at a steep loss, just to satisfy the most relentless collection agencies. They traded their vaulted ceilings, custom stone fireplaces, and sprawling manicured lawns for a cramped two-bedroom condominium on the industrial outskirts of the city. The new apartment smelled of cheap carpet glue and old paint. Vivian spent her days sitting in a small beige living room, staring blankly at a television screen, entirely cut off from the wealthy social circles she had worshipped for 3 decades. Her manicured friends had long since abandoned her, treating her financial collapse as a highly contagious disease. She no longer hosted garden parties or attended charity galas. She simply existed within 4 thin walls, a ghost of her former vanity. Darren took a mid-level managerial job at a local hardware distributor. The man who once commanded a timber empire was now forced to clock in at dawn inventory boxes of steel screws and answer to regional managers he once considered his inferiors. Their reputation was shattered, and their golden child was living in their tiny guest bedroom, stripped of her Montgomery name and her digital influence. I did not simply sell the Smoky Mountain Lake House to the highest bidder. Liquidating the property for a rapid cash injection would have been the easy, predictable route. I wanted the fate of that estate to serve as a permanent, lasting testament to the profound difference between vanity and actual substance. I transferred the deed into a philanthropic trust managed by my technology company. I ordered a thorough renovation of the property. My contractors stripped away Darren's, mounted hunting trophies, removed Vivian's outdated floral drapery, and tore out the dark, oppressive woodwork. We modernized the interior, installing high-speed fiber optic internet, ergonomic workstations, and sleek, sustainable furniture. I transformed the property into the official annual corporate retreat for my data infrastructure foundation. Every autumn, the brilliant software engineers, systems architects, and project managers who helped me build my fortune travel down to Tennessee. They spend a full week collaborating, writing code, and resting on the pristine waterfront. The true poetic justice was delivered through the glowing screen of a smartphone. Savannah still spent hours scrolling through social media, desperately clinging to the digital ghost of her former lifestyle brand. She had to watch from her cramped guest bedroom as my corporate employees posted photographs from their retreat. She saw brilliant, successful women drinking margaritas on her childhood dock. She watched them laughing on the restored wooden deck, the exact spot where Darren used to host his exclusive political fundraisers. The physical spaces my family had hoarded to project false superiority were now being utilized to reward genuine hard work and intellect. Savannah could not block the images. The photographs circulated through the local tech sector and spilled over into the Nashville community feeds. Every time she logged online, she was forced to witness the vibrant, thriving life I had built inside the very walls her father had forfeited. The financial mechanics of the foreclosure yielded an even greater victory for the community. The appraised value of the lake house far exceeded the $500,000 bridge loan Darren owed my holding company. I instructed my legal team to balance the ledger with surgical precision. I recouped my initial $500,000 investment, returning the capital to my primary investment portfolio.
I did not keep a single penny of the excess equity. Instead, I liquidated the remaining market value of the estate and drafted a certified cashier check. I donated the entire remaining balance to a Nashville-based charitable organization dedicated to providing advanced science and technology education for underprivileged young women. My parents had drained their accounts to buy a fleeting night of superficial attention for a daughter who offered the world nothing but a filtered photograph. I used their forfeited assets to fund the education of hundreds of girls who would actually build the future. The legacy of the Harper family wealth was no longer tied to country club galas or melted swan ice sculptures. It was anchored to education independence and quiet, enduring power. I sat on the private stone terrace of the Château de la Roche. The crisp autumn air drifted through the Rhône Valley, carrying the familiar, soothing scent of crushed rosemary and blooming lavender. The morning sun cast a warm, golden light over the ancient limestone walls, illuminating the endless rows of purple flowers swaying gently in the French breeze. I held a small porcelain cup of dark espresso, feeling the heat radiate against my palms. Ethan sat at the wrought iron bistro table across from me, quietly turning the pages of a morning newspaper. He looked up, catching my eye, and offered a soft, knowing smile. There was no tension in his shoulders, no frantic need to perform for a room full of strangers. We had secured our peace. My family had made their choices. They prioritized a hollow aesthetic over genuine connection. They chose the loud, demanding golden child while attempting to erase the quiet, practical daughter. In doing so, they had unwittingly handed me the exact tools I needed to construct my empire in total peace. They gave me the gift of underestimation. They provided the precise camouflage I required to amass my resources without their toxic interference. When the final confrontation arrived, I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to throw a glass or hurl bitter insults across a crowded room. I simply presented the undeniable mathematical truth of their own decisions. Silence had never been a sign of weakness. It had always been the ultimate checkmate. In the vast, complex tapestry of American culture, the traditional family structure is almost universally revered as the ultimate sanctuary. It is sold to us as the foundational bedrock of society, a safe harbor with a metaphorical white picket fence, designed to shield us from the relentless transactional demands of the outside world. We are taught from our very first breaths that the home is a sacred space where our intrinsic value is recognized, entirely independent of our financial achievements, our physical appearances, or our social standing. The promise of the American family is that blood is thicker than water, and that parents are the unwavering architects of a child's emotional security. Yet, as the sweeping saga of Chelsea Harper and her family so powerfully reveals, this sacred architecture can be effortlessly inverted. When parents replace honesty and fairness with vanity and favoritism, the home ceases to be a sanctuary of unconditional love. It becomes a cutthroat theater of social currency, and in a theater driven by ego, someone is always forced to play the silent supporting role, in the dark, just so the favored star can burn brightly in the spotlight. Darren and Vivian Harper did not set out to intentionally destroy their family, which is perhaps the most chilling aspect of their downfall. Like many modern parents caught in the intoxicating competitive grip of social mobility, they fundamentally confused financial provision with genuine affection and outward appearance with internal substance. They fell victim to a uniquely modern cultural disease, the fervent belief that a child's ultimate success is measured by the prestige of their zip code, the brand of their car, and the staggering grandeur of their wedding day. In their desperate, blinding attempt to secure Savannah's position among the Nashville elite, they abandoned their most fundamental responsibility as parents, to be long-term guides. True, effective guidance requires the profound courage to say the word no. It demands a high level of emotional awareness to recognize that shielding a child from the natural consequences of their own vanity does not protect them. It only leaves them woefully defenseless against the harsh gravity of reality. Savannah was never taught how to build a meaningful, resilient life. She was only taught how to decorate a fragile one. When the power grid failed and the brutal southern heat bore down on her reception, her melting ice swans were not just a logistical failure of event planning. They were a profound physical indictment of a parenting philosophy that prioritized aesthetic presentation over emotional resilience. On the opposite side of this fractured familial dynamic stood Chelsea, the invisible pillar, expected to silently bear the crushing weight of her family's grand illusions. Her journey exposes the devastating lack of fairness that plagues households intoxicated by favoritism. For 3 decades, Chelsea was categorized by her parents as the practical daughter, a highly convenient, weaponized label used to justify severe emotional and financial neglect. Her parents exploited her stability, operating under the dangerous assumption that her quiet competence meant she did not require their praise, their time, or their fierce loyalty. This is a quiet, insidious tragedy unfolding in countless living rooms across the country right now. Parents routinely pour their finite resources, both emotional and financial, into the loudest, most demanding child, assuming the self-sufficient, high-achieving child will simply manage on their own. The fatal danger of being a low-maintenance child is that eventually your family forgets you require any maintenance at all. True emotional awareness in parenting means understanding that a child's independence is never a substitute for parental love. Chelsea learned to thrive and amass her massive wealth not because of her family's guidance, but in spite of their profound neglect. She built her $14 million empire in the shadows simply because it was the only space they allowed her to occupy. Stories like Chelsea's resonate so deeply because they hold up a pristine, unyielding mirror to the quiet, often unspoken fractures in our own lives. If you have ever felt like the load-bearing wall in a family that only admires the gilded wallpaper, you are not alone in your struggle. To explore more powerful narratives that uncover the hidden truths of family dynamics, personal resilience, and the difficult journey of reclaiming your absolute worth, make sure to follow the Amanda Told Stories channel. We dive deep into the complexities of human relationships, providing a necessary voice for those who have spent far too long standing in the background. Join our growing community, share your own experiences, and discover the liberating power of speaking your truth. Society aggressively conditions us to believe that family is an unbreakable sacred bond, an institution demanding our unconditional loyalty, regardless of the heavy toll it takes on our own mental health and personal resources. We are fed the persistent, romanticized myth that forgiveness always requires a physical reconciliation, and that walking away from the people who gave you life is the ultimate moral failure. But the story of the Harper family challenges this deeply ingrained conventional wisdom. It proposes a stark, highly unconventional truth. Unconditional love should never be confused with unconditional subsidy. Cutting off toxic family members is frequently painted as a selfish act of cruelty. However, the contrarian reality is that sometimes the most profound act of love you can commit, both for yourself and even for those who have deeply wronged you, is to step aside and let their artificial world collapse. We are traditionally taught that a parent's ultimate duty is to build a wealthy, comfortable kingdom for their children to inherit and enjoy. But what if that conventional blueprint is entirely wrong? What if the true measure of successful parenting is not what tangible assets you leave for your children, but what enduring character you leave in them? Darren and Vivian literally mortgaged their souls and their beloved lake house to buy a temporary crown for a daughter who did not possess the emotional fortitude to rule. Simultaneously, they alienated the daughter who had quietly, meticulously built her own undeniable kingdom from scratch. When Darren was finally faced with total bankruptcy and the legal seizure of his sanctuary, the tragedy was not that his wealthy daughter callously refused to save him. The true, devastating tragedy was that he had spent 30 years cultivating a relationship based entirely on extraction and exploitation, and was genuinely shocked to find that the well had finally run dry. The foreclosure of the Smoky Mountain estate was not a malicious act of vengeance. It was the inevitable mathematical result of a family that had operated on moral credit for far too long. In American culture, we are addicted to stories of neat cinematic redemption, where the fractured family inevitably gathers around a warm Thanksgiving table to apologize, cry, and instantly heal decades of trauma. But real life rarely ties itself up in such pristine, comfortable bows. True healing does not always look like a joyful reunion. More often than not, true healing looks like an empty chair at a dinner table. It looks like a heavy iron gate closing decisively on a French chateau, securing the hard-won peace within. As you reflect on Chelsea's journey from the shadows to the sunlit terrace of her own life, I urge you to look closely at the architecture of your own relationships. Are you pouring your limited energy into building a foundation of enduring stone? Or are you desperately trying to air condition a canvas tent in the middle of a catastrophic heat wave? We spend our entire lives terrified of disappointing the people who raised us, terrified of being the one who finally breaks the family apart. But perhaps we must entertain a far more terrifying yet ultimately liberating thought. You cannot break a system that was designed to break you. Some bridges are not meant to be carefully repaired. Some bridges must be allowed to burn to the ground, simply so the fire can illuminate the path to the home you were always meant to build.